Welcome back to our Spring Boot tutorial series. Today, we're diving into the fascinating world of conditional annotations in Spring Boot. These annotations are incredibly powerful tools that allow us to control the creation of beans based on specific conditions. By the end of this video, you'll have a solid understanding of how to use these annotations to make your Spring Boot applications more flexible and efficient. Let's jump right in. What are conditional annotations? Conditional annotations in Spring Boot enable us to define beans that are created only under specific conditions. These conditions can be based on various factors such as the environment, the presence of certain classes, properties, and much more. This flexibility is incredibly useful for configuring beans dynamically, ensuring that our application behaves appropriately in different scenarios. Now, let's talk about one of the most popular conditional annotations at ConditionalOnProperty. This annotation is a game changer because it lets us create beans conditionally based on specific properties in our application's configuration. Imagine being able to toggle features on and off just by changing a property in your configuration file. How cool is that? This not only makes our applications more flexible, but also a breeze to manage. Let's dive into how ConditionalOnProperty works and see some examples in action. Imagine we want to create a Hindi greeting service bean only if the property greeting.language is set to Hindi in our application.properties or application.yml file. This is where ConditionalOnProperty shines. By using this annotation, we can ensure that our bean is only created when the specified condition is met. Let's see how we can achieve this in our Spring Boot application. Add the @ConditionalOnProperty annotation to our Hindi greeting service class. Specify the name attribute with greeting.language and the having value attribute with Hindi value in the @ConditionalOnProperty annotation. This condition is like giving Spring specific instructions. Hey Spring, first fetch the value of greeting.language from the application configuration. If this value is equal to Hindi, then and only then create the bean. Otherwise, do not create it. Let's open our application.properties file. As you can see, it's currently empty. Let's start the application. As we can see in the logs, the English greeting service simple, and Spanish greeting service beans are created, but the Hindi greeting service bean is not. This happened because we did not specify the greeting.language value in our application.properties file. When Spring fetches this value and doesn't find the key in the configuration, it treats the value as null. Since null is not equal to Hindi, the Hindi greeting service bean is not created. Let's add the greeting.language property to our application.properties file with the value Hindi and then restart the application. This will ensure that the Hindi greeting service bean is created as expected this time. As we can see in the logs, the Hindi greeting service bean is now created successfully. This confirms that our configuration is working as expected. By setting the greeting.language property to Hindi, we have successfully instructed Spring to create the Hindi greeting service bean. But what if we change the greeting.language value to English? Let's see what happens. First, update the application.properties file. Then, restart the application. As we can see in the logs, the Hindi greeting service bean is not created. This time, Spring fetches the greeting.language value as English and compares it to Hindi. Since the values do not match, the Hindi greeting service bean is not created. You can also use the @ConditionalOnProperty annotation in conjunction with the @bean annotation, and it works in a similar way. This allows you to conditionally create beans directly within your configuration classes. Another cool annotation in Spring Boot is @ConditionalOnMissingBean. This one makes sure that a bean is only created if a specific bean isn't already present in the Spring context. It's perfect for providing default implementations or for scenarios where you might want to override a bean conditionally. Imagine having a backup plan in case your primary bean isn't available. That's exactly what a ConditionalOnMissingBean does. Let's dive into an example to see it in action. As you can see on my screen, we previously created the English greeting service bean using the @bean annotation. Let's open the English greeting service class and add the @component annotation. This will create a bean named English greeting service. Now, we also have another bean of the same type and name created by the greeting service config class. So, what's going to happen when we start the application? Will Spring get confused with two beans of the same type and name, or will it handle it gracefully? Let's start the application and find out. The application failed to start. As we can see in the logs, Spring tells us that the English greeting service bean defined in greeting service config wasn't registered because it's already defined in the English greeting service class. This happens because Spring found two beans with the same type and name, which causes a conflict. So now, I want the English greeting service bean defined in greeting service config to be created only when English greeting service is not already present in the Spring application context. So here, we can use the @ConditionalOnMissingBean annotation. This will ensure that the bean in greeting service config is only created if no other bean with the same type and name already exists. Let's add the @ConditionalOnMissingBean annotation. Now, let's add a system.out.println statement to identify if the English greeting service bean is created from the greeting service config class or not. This will help us confirm that the @ConditionalOnMissingBean annotation is working as expected. Now, let's start the application. As we can see in the logs, the English greeting service bean is created, but our log message from the greeting service config class is not printed. This means the bean was created due to the @component annotation, not from the configuration class. This confirms that the @ConditionalOnMissingBean annotation successfully prevented the bean in greeting service config from being created since it was already defined by the @component annotation. Let's remove the @component annotation from the English greeting service class. This time, since the English greeting service bean is not present in the Spring application context, the @ConditionalOnMissingBean condition will evaluate to true, and the bean will be created from the greeting service config class. Let's start the application and observe the logs to confirm that the bean is created as expected. As we can see in the logs, the English greeting service bean is created, and the log message we added in the greeting service config class is printed. This confirms that the bean was successfully created from the configuration class, thanks to the @ConditionalOnMissingBean annotation. Our setup is working perfectly. Now, let's talk about another powerful conditional annotation @ConditionalOnBean. This annotation allows us to create a bean only if a specific bean or set of beans is already present in the Spring application context. It's a great way to set up dependencies between beans, ensuring that certain beans are only created when their prerequisites are met. Let's see how it works. Suppose I want to create a Spanish greeting service bean only when the English greeting service bean is present in the Spring application context. This is where the @ConditionalOnBean annotation comes in handy. By using this annotation, we can make sure that the Spanish greeting service bean is only created if the English greeting service bean exists. Let's see how we can set this up. Let's add the @ConditionalOnBean annotation to the Spanish greeting service class, right alongside the @component annotation. Pass the name attribute with the value English greeting service. This will ensure that the Spanish greeting service bean is only created if the English greeting service bean is present in the Spring application context. Now, let's start the application and check the logs. As we see in the logs, the Spanish greeting service bean is created because the English greeting service bean is present in the Spring application context. This confirms that the @ConditionalOnBean annotation worked perfectly, ensuring that the Spanish greeting service bean is only created when its prerequisite bean, English greeting service, is available. Now, let's change English greeting service to English greeting service 1 inside the @ConditionalOnBean annotation on the Spanish greeting service class. This will ensure that the Spanish greeting service bean is only created if a bean named English greeting service 1 is present in the Spring application context. But we know that the English greeting service 1 bean doesn't exist. Let's start the application. As we see in the logs, the Spanish greeting service bean is not created because the English greeting service 1 bean is not present in the Spring application context. This confirms that the @ConditionalOnBean annotation is working as expected, ensuring that the Spanish greeting service bean is only created when its dependency, English greeting service 1, is available. Now, let's explore the @ConditionalOnClass annotation. This annotation allows us to create a bean only if a specific class is present on the class path. It's particularly useful for enabling features or configurations based on the presence of third-party libraries. For example, imagine you want to create a database service bean, but only if a certain database driver class is available. With @ConditionalOnClass, you can instruct Spring to check for the presence of this class before creating the bean. If the class isn't found, the bean won't be created, ensuring your application only loads components that it can actually use. This approach is especially handy for integrating with optional dependencies. For instance, if your application can work with multiple types of databases, you can use @ConditionalOnClass to configure specific database services based on which drivers are present in the class path. This makes your application more flexible and adaptable to different environments and configurations. Suppose I want to create a Spanish greeting service bean only if the Hindi greeting service class is present in our application. Let's remove the @ConditionalOnBean annotation from the Spanish greeting service class. Let's add the @ConditionalOnClass annotation to the Spanish greeting service class. And pass the fully qualified name of the Hindi greeting service class in the name attribute. This will ensure that the Spanish greeting service bean is only created if the Hindi greeting service class is present in our application. Restart the application. Oops, the Spanish greeting service bean is not created. It seems like we might have passed the wrong package name in the @ConditionalOnClass annotation. Let's verify the fully qualified name of the Hindi greeting service class and correct it in the annotation. Restart the application. As we can see in the logs, the Spanish greeting service bean is now created. Now, let's change the Hindi greeting service to Hindi greeting service 1 in the @ConditionalOnClass annotation and restart the application. This will ensure that the Spanish greeting service bean is only created if the Hindi greeting service 1 class is present in our application context. As we can see in the logs, the Spanish greeting service bean is not created. This is because the Hindi greeting service 1 class is not present in our application. This demonstrates how the @ConditionalOnClass annotation effectively prevents the creation of the Spanish greeting service bean when the specified class is not found in the class path. Now, let's explore the @ConditionalOnMissingClass annotation. This annotation allows us to create a bean only if a specific class is not present on the class path. It's useful for providing alternative configurations or beans when certain classes or libraries are absent. For example, imagine you have a feature in your application that relies on a specific cloud service library for storage, such as Amazon S3. If the S3 library is not available, you want to provide a fallback local storage service instead. By using the @ConditionalOnMissingClass annotation, you can ensure that your application switches to the local storage service when the S3 library is absent. Suppose you want to create a Spanish greeting service bean only if the Hindi greeting service class is not present in our application. This is where the @ConditionalOnMissingClass annotation comes in handy. Let's comment out the @ConditionalOnClass annotation on the Spanish greeting service class. Let's add the @ConditionalOnMissingClass annotation to the Spanish greeting service class. And pass the fully qualified name of the Hindi greeting service class in the value attribute. This will ensure that the Spanish greeting service bean is only created if the Hindi greeting service class is not present in our application. Let's start the application and check the logs to confirm that. As we can see in the logs, the Spanish greeting service bean is not created because the Hindi greeting service class is present in our application. This confirms that the @ConditionalOnMissingClass annotation is working as expected, preventing the creation of the Spanish greeting service bean when the Hindi greeting service class is available. Now, let's change Hindi greeting service to Hindi greeting service 1 in the @ConditionalOnMissingClass annotation. Let's start the application and check the logs. As we can see in the logs, the Spanish greeting service bean is now created because the Hindi greeting service 1 class is not present in our application. This confirms that the @ConditionalOnMissingClass annotation is working correctly, allowing the Spanish greeting service bean to be created when the specified class is absent. Now, let's explore the @ConditionalOnExpression annotation. This annotation allows us to create a bean based on the evaluation of a SPL, Spring Expression Language, expression. It's a powerful tool for adding more complex conditional logic to your bean creation process. Suppose you want to create a Hindi greeting service bean only if the greeting.language property is set to Hindi. Let's comment out the @ConditionalOnProperty annotation on the Hindi greeting service class. Let's add the @ConditionalOnExpression annotation to the Hindi greeting service class and define the expression in SPL, Spring Expression Language, format. Let's start the application and check the logs to confirm that. As we can see in the logs, the Hindi greeting service bean is created because we have already specified greeting.language as Hindi in the application.properties file. This confirms that the @ConditionalOnExpression annotation is working correctly, creating the Hindi greeting service bean based on the specified condition in the SPL expression. Now, let's change the greeting.language value to English in the application.properties file and restart the application. As we can see in the logs, the Hindi greeting service bean is not created because the greeting.language value is set to English in the application.properties file. This confirms that the @ConditionalOnExpression annotation is working as expected, preventing the creation of the Hindi greeting service bean when the specified condition in the SBL expression is not met. Now, let's explore the condition interface. This interface allows us to create custom conditions for bean creation, providing a high degree of flexibility and control over the bean lifecycle in Spring. By implementing the condition interface, we can define complex logic that determines whether a bean should be created. This is useful when the built-in conditional annotations, like @ConditionalOnProperty or @ConditionalOnClass, don't cover your specific needs. Let's create a new class inside the config package and name it Greeting Service ImpleCondition. Implement the condition interface and override the matches method with our custom logic. Matches method takes two parameters. Condition context. This provides access to the current state of the application context, including environment properties, bean definitions, and resource loaders. It allows us to check various aspects of the application context to make our decision. Annotated type metadata. This provides access to the annotations and metadata of the class or method where the condition is applied. We can use this to inspect any annotations or metadata present on the bean definition. Let's add our custom logic inside the matches method of the Greeting Service ImpleCondition class. We'll fetch the special.greeting.enabled property from the environment and check if it is set to true. If it is, we'll return true, otherwise, we'll return false. Now, inside the matches method, we'll retrieve the special.greeting.enabled property from the environment. And check if it's equal to true. If it is, we'll return true, indicating that the condition is met and the bean should be created. Otherwise, we'll return false. Let's open the Greeting Service Imple class and add the @conditional annotation just above it, passing Greeting Service ImpleCondition.class in the value attribute. This will ensure that the Greeting Service ImpleBean is only created when our custom condition is met. Now, let's add special.greeting.enabled equals false to the application.properties file. Let's start the application and check the logs. As we can see in the logs, the Greeting Service ImpleBean is not created. Spring detected that the Greeting Service Imple class is annotated with @conditional, and it found that Greeting Service ImpleCondition is specified in the value attribute. Spring then called the matches method of this class. The method returned false, indicating that the condition was not met. As a result, Spring did not create the Greeting Service ImpleBean. This demonstrates how Spring evaluates the custom condition and decides whether or not to create a bean based on the result of the matches method. Now, let's change the value of special.greeting.enable to true in the application.properties file and restart the application. As we can see in the logs, the greeting service bean is now created. This time, Spring detected that the special.greeting.enabled property is set to true, which caused the matches method in greeting service condition to return true. As a result, Spring created the greeting service bean. This confirms that our custom condition is working as expected. Spring Boot provides several powerful conditional annotations that allow us to control bean creation based on different conditions. Let's explore some of them. @ConditionalOnJava. This annotation allows us to create a bean based on the Java version being used. For example, if we want to create a bean only if the application is running on Java 8. @ConditionalOnWebApplication. This annotation ensures that a bean is created only if the application is a web application. It's perfect for defining beans that are specific to web contexts. @ConditionalOnNotWebApplication. In contrast, this annotation creates a bean only if the application is not a web application. It's useful for defining beans that are specific to non-web contexts. @ConditionalOnResource. This annotation creates a bean only if a specific resource is present on the class path. For example, to create a bean only if a particular configuration file is available. @ConditionalOnCloud Platform. This annotation allows us to create a bean based on the cloud platform the application is running on. For example, to create a bean only if the application is running on Kubernetes. @ConditionalOnSingleCandidate. This annotation creates a bean only if there is a single candidate bean of a given type in the Spring context. It's useful for ensuring that a bean is created only when there is no ambiguity in bean definitions. Combining conditional annotations allows us to create more specific and flexible conditions for bean creation in Spring Boot. By using multiple annotations together, we can ensure that a bean is created only when all specified conditions are met. For example, let's combine @ConditionalOnProperty and @ConditionalOnClass. By combining these two annotations, we can create a bean only if both conditions are satisfied. For example, you might want to create an English greeting service bean only if the greeting.language property is set to English and a certain class, com.example.someClass, is present in the class path. In this scenario, Spring will check both conditions before creating the bean. First, it will verify that the greeting.language property is set to English. Second, it will ensure that com.example.someClass exists in the class path. If both conditions are met, the bean will be created. If either condition fails, the bean will not be created. This approach gives us fine-grained control over bean creation, making our application context more adaptable to various environments and configurations. Combining conditional annotations is a powerful technique that allows us to handle complex conditions with ease, ensuring that beans are only created when all necessary criteria are fulfilled. This makes our Spring Boot applications more robust and configurable, capable of adjusting to different scenarios based on the application's state and configuration. In conclusion, Spring Boot's conditional annotations provide a powerful way to manage bean creation based on various criteria, making your applications more flexible and adaptable. By using annotations like @ConditionalOnProperty, @ConditionalOnClass, @ConditionalOnMissingBean, and others, you can precisely control which beans are created under specific conditions, ensuring that your application context is optimized for different environments and configurations. Thank you for joining me in this deep dive into Spring Boot's conditional annotations. I hope you found this tutorial helpful and informative. If you enjoyed this video and want to learn more, please subscribe to our channel for more Spring Boot tutorials and other tech content. Don't forget to like, comment, and share this video with others who might find it useful. See you in the next video.